right. I just wanted to welcome Narimon Safavi to the podium, CEO of Generative Multilog, which promotes empathy-oriented creativity. Its first project, presented at an international exposition of contemporary modern art at Expo Chicago, was a taboo-breaking cultural diplomacy exhibition featuring women artists from Afghanistan, Iran, Israel, Palestine, and Turkey. He's a contributor to the late Chicago public radio program Worldview. His weekly Weekend Passport segment explored global cultural happenings in Chicago. He's a co-founder of Pasfada Arts and Cultural Exchange, an organization dedicated to supporting Iranian art in the US and American art in Iran. He is served as a board member of the Gene Siskel Film Center and the annual Festival of Films from Iran, and he is going to help us through some testimonials.
Absolutely. It's a privilege to be here and an honor, and I am glad to have been asked, and much gratitude to Hamid Naficy and Danny Postal for getting me involved in this, and Rebecca for inviting me. I think we have some video testimonials that we were going to have first, and then I'll give you a little bit of my own personal recounting of memories with Hamid Naficy, and then I'm going to read a testimonial from Hamid's brother, Majid Naficy, also known as the poet of Los Angeles. I'm going to read that testimonial for you.
Well, Dad, what can I say? Still thinking it through as I do this, but I feel like there have been, as I think back on your work, there have been a few things that have resounded with me and stayed with me over the years and expressed themselves in different ways. Interstitial sites, living and existing within the interstices, and the idea of homeland and where it resides and what it comes from, what it derives from. A number of things have, I think, crept in. I've always felt like I wanted to take a deeper dive with you into your work. I haven't had time to sit with it, I think, in the way that I would like to. So I hope to do that sometime soon. That feels like a fun way to be with you and to honor your work and to become maybe a little more part of it and part of the conversation. Even though I know we've played some role in that over the years, peripherally, talking about titles and ideas and ways of packaging things and so on and so forth. So yeah, and here we are at retirement. I've also learned a lot from you in terms of work ethic and the sort of slow and steady pace and the value that holds. It's been fun to see what you've come up with, in a sense. I'm at an interesting point, I guess, in my life too, where I'm making moves, so to speak, as you did, and I think I was becoming aware of some of your work at around this same phase that I'm in now, and so that's kind of a fun thing to look on, I think, as we walk through life and we see us passing through moments or phases that loved ones have passed through before, with kids, with career, some of those sorts of things. And I love you. I've learned a lot from watching you and the way that you've done things. Some things to do and probably some things not to do as well. We all have our own styles and expressions and flaws, but we've been watching you. I guess I would say that, and it's been fun to pop in and out of your world and see things. You and I see things through very different eyes in some ways, very different lenses, sort of intellectual lenses, not emotional lenses so much, I think. So that's been fun. I think if I had to say something, overarching that maybe you could have done better, improved, or worked on a little bit, it would have been that you could have worked a little harder and probably a little more. And who knows where you would have gotten.
Salam, Hamid Jan. Hi, everybody. I would like to thank the organizer of this conference, in giving me a chance to participate virtually in this conference. It is indeed a nice title, Like Water Through Stone. It shows one of the characteristics of my brother, Hamid, his persistency in having his work done once he starts up with a project. Since many of the participants would discuss the academic works of Hamid, I would like to shed some light on his personal surrounding, the family and the city he grew up, and my impression about him as a brother, of course, 6 years younger than Hamid. Hamid was born in a large and beautiful city of Isfahan, an ancient city which before Tehran was the capital of Iran for almost 250 years. City of blue sky and blue tides. He was born in a large family, father as physician, mother as housewife. He was among 9 children, 5 brothers and 4 sisters. He's the oldest brother. Our father was a well-known physician. In fact, his profession was transmitted to him from 13 generations. His old ancestor was a court physician during Ulugh Beg reign in Samarkand, the grandson of Taimur the Long in 15th century. My father wanted Hamid to study medicine and become a dentist. But we are very lucky that his interest was in different direction. I remember young Hamid with a camera in hand, a photo camera that our neighbor brought for him as a present from Germany. He was maybe 14 or 15 years old, and I remember him going around with his leather case camera, snapping, shooting almost everything. Our family albums are rich with his taken photos, especially with the pictures of our younger sister, Nushi, at time maybe 3 or 4 years old. As a young adult in Isfahan, with a photo camera to Chicago and Northwestern University around the middle of his 70s, as an established scholar in cinema and film. As he said, his third child, that means the great 4-volume books of a social history of Iranian cinema, is a long path that he has successfully paved away. Now he has reached the summit of his career and profession, at the same time his summit of his wisdom and personal maturity. It is fortunate that we celebrate the works of my dear Hamid in Chicago as a world-known scholar of cinema, diaspora, and exile. However, it is unfortunate that due to despotic Islamic regime of Iran, which rules our beloved country, now for him is dangerous to visit Iran. In fact, from 4 volumes, only the first one of his masterpiece has been translated into Farsi and published. Hamid Jan, I wish you the best for celebrating together with your colleagues in Chicago, and wish you that sometimes in the near future, you and we would celebrate a secular Iran and your books would be translated without any censorship, and you could be able to celebrate in Iran the homeland that you passionately keep it in your mind. Hamid Jan, یک روز به آنجا باز خواهیم گشت. Thank you very much.
This video comes to you from one of the places you used to call home, Los Angeles. a place from which we might say you are now exiled. So I'll start by saying thank you, Hamid, for helping all of us develop a deeper and more nuanced understanding of what it means to be a cultural exile. Although I'm in SoCal as I make this video, by the time you see it, I will be in Tel Aviv, half a world away, making my own brief diasporic return. As you traverse that liminal zone known as academic retirement, I'd like to draw your attention back to Southern California, to the place you once called home, a place where you studied, made films, conducted research, taught, and engaged in all manner of intellectual labor. With my few minutes, I'd like to focus on the time you spent at the University of Southern California in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Hamid, I hope you recall, as I do, the years you and I worked alongside one another at USC, first as editors of a rather lowly sort in the beginning for what was an important academic film journal of the time, the Quarterly Review of Film Studies. At this moment in the 1980s, QRFS was co-edited by two rather formidable figures, Beverly Houston and Rod Gottesman, the latter of whom had founded the journal in 1976. Other members of the editorial board included Jeannie Fadiman and Kitty Kovacs, now better known to us as the namesake of the Catherine Singer Kovacs Book and Essay Prizes administered by SCMS. I'm sad to say that none of these memorable individuals are with us any longer. In fact, Hamid, you and I may very well be the lone survivors of that era's QRFS board. You were around as we rechristened the journal the Quarterly Review of Film and Video to capture the transition from that earlier phase of our field and its exclusive focus on film. The journal, in fact, lives on today in other editorial hands. One of your great contributions during this time was to partner with a beloved mentor and friend, Tashomi Gabriel, to edit a volume entitled Otherness and the Media, the Ethnography of the Imagined and Imaged. That book was cutting edge for its moment, nearly 30 years ago, and is still cited today. It was one of a series of volumes the publishers, Taylor and Francis, by this time the owners of QRFV, encouraged us to produce to address pressing issues of the moment. Otherness and the Media was by far the most successful of those volumes. Another signal accomplishment during this time was your teaching of graduate seminars in what was then the Division of Critical Studies in the USC School of Cinema Television, now the Division of Cinema and Media Studies in the USC School of Cinematic Arts. Those grad seminars were vital for that generation of our grad students who would go on to populate the field of cinema and media studies. The field was somewhat narrower in those days. This was certainly the case at USC. Your classes helped open up the world to the grad students of the late 80s and early 90s, students for whom the American cinema tended to be the focus. For while the Rick Jules and Drew Caspers were teaching the Hollywood film, you were exposing our students to a range of cultural and intellectual counter-discourses and a broader domain of cinematic expression that has served them well during their academic careers. I should add that another colleague at that time was Yuri Tsivian, who was introducing our students to early cinema with an emphasis on Russian and Soviet cinema, prior to his departure for the University of Chicago. Thus, we at USC and in SoCal sadly lost two of the most accomplished film scholars of their generation to the greater Chicago community. I don't like to linger on that thought. I was never surprised by your successes later in your career at Rice and then Northwestern. Oh, baby, I was a little jealous of the new colleagues and students who were reaping the rewards of all that sustained research. But the Hamid I remember best was the one with his shirt sleeves rolled up, walking the halls of the fourth floor of a building on the USC campus that no longer exists, deeply immersed in editorial labors, putting out a film journal and tiptoeing around the sometimes fragile egos of our senior colleagues, Ron and Beverly. I think we both learned a lot during this period about how to write, edit, and manage an academic journal for little glory or compensation, as well as how to handle big personalities. But I also learned the deep value of working alongside a trusted and hardworking colleague, you, Hamid. Soon enough, you'd be trading in the editing of the work of others for publishing your own esteemed books. And yet, the beneficiaries of those years in the editorial trenches have no doubt been your grad students and advisees who wrote better dissertations and journal articles because of those finely honed editorial skills which you passed on to them. While we've had little opportunity to remain in steady contact over the decades due to geographic separation, I've never forgotten the early years, the comradeship, the humor and good spirits you displayed at that time, long before the accolades began to come your way. Hamid, you were and have always been a class act, a good friend, a devoted scholar and mentor, and an all-around mensch. I'm so sorry I can't be with you today, but I send you my love and best wishes from across the globe.
Hi everyone, my name is Nahal and I'm Hamid's niece tuning in from Iran. I moved to the US in the year 2000 to study for my PhD in anthropology, a decision that Hamid had a big part in, and I basically lived with Hamid and Kelly and the kids off and on for almost a decade, not necessarily in the same house or even the same town, but as part of the same pack. I came back to Iran in 2008, got married, got a university job, and I sometimes feel a million light years far from that world. But today I want to say a few words about how Hamid, dear Uncle Hamid, has touched my life. And since it is in so many different ways, I will focus on just one. So this piece is about you, Hamid, and I'm calling it Elsewhere. I grew up looking at pictures of Hamid as a handsome young man that came in the mail and were kept at a special album at my grandparents'. Pictures of him with his blonde and beautiful American wife and his hybrid children, so like us and so unlike us, in exotic settings such as in front of a fireplace or on a reclining chair, in skiing or paragliding gear against postcardish backgrounds of remarkable greenness or snow in California or Idaho. I also grew up reading letters by him and Kelly and Kamran and Shada, always full of really interesting and creative things they were doing, such as Shada writing a letter to Saddam Hussein to stop the war with Iran. As a teenager, I became very interested in his writings and theories about exile, trickled down to us through his calls and telephone calls and personal and collective letters, which interestingly told us not only of how he was, but also of what he was working on, as he was always working on something, and his film festival brochures and books and articles all arriving in the mail. At 18, I even labored over reading and translating into Farsi the introduction to his book, Making of Exile Cultures. This is one of the coolest letters that I have received from Hamid, and there are many of them. But this one, as you can see, is on the inside of a pavillon envelope sent to me from Heidelberg. And in it, he talks about the local and the global being perched upon each other, such that one cannot fully grasp one without going through the other. So this gives you an idea of the content of some of these letters. So when it became official that I was so drawn to the idea of exile, I just had to impose one upon myself. I longed to be a lonely stranger in a strange land, walking on wet sidewalks, hands in pockets, stopping on foggy bridges to watch and maybe feed the migrant birds. Images that, although my exile ended up being in the vast and friendly and mostly sunny marshlands of Texas, I would find myself submerged in Hamid's Exile and Diaspora Cinema seminar at the Rice Media Center at the far end of the Rice University campus a few years after receiving these letters and translating the introduction to the Exile book. Films by Jonas Mekas, Mona Hatoum, Twin Minha, Atom Egoyan, and many others whose names escape me, though their impact was powerful. I learned from Hamid through the rich epistolary relationship that we had over the years, and all the years that I spent with him in America, and all the things that he has published during his prolific career that I have read, that not being at home was as much a position in the world, an intellectual stance, and an ethical choice as being at home. That one could find a home in liminal and interstitial, both words that I learned from Hamid for the first time before I knew what everyday phrases like hang in there exactly meant. So in liminal and interstitial spaces, and not necessarily in one solid place. That not having one home meant both having less and having more than one home. And that one needed to leave one's home in order to find it. So thank you very much, Hamid, for being there for me always. And by the way, I have one of your drawings here with me. Please.
Well, I learned that my old friend Hamid Naficy was retiring this year from a distinguished academic and professional career, and I'm very pleased to be part of celebrating that career. My name is Rick Gaskins, and I go back many years with Hamid, back all the way to 1964 at the University of Southern California, where Hamid arrived as a freshman. He was introduced to me by my friend and roommate, Tom Ashton, and very quickly we learned that Hamid's point of view on things could be extremely interesting. It was not the usual dormitory discourse. We talked about philosophy, books, cinema, everything that was happening in Southern California culture. And we very quickly came to appreciate Hamid's offbeat humor and ability at wordplay. His English was improving all the time, and far better than my high school French, which I might have tried out a time or two to Hamid's amusement. We kept in regular contact as undergraduates, although we didn't take classes together. We sometimes looked for transportation to do things in the Los Angeles area. We would visit downtown Los Angeles to go to Philippe's restaurant across the street from Union Station, or Hollywood to go to the Pickwick bookstore. And Hamid was a frequent visitor at my family home in the San Fernando Valley. So our paths crossed quite a lot during this time. There were things happening, of course, in the 1960s, even at a placid campus like the University of Southern California. 1965, the riots in the nearby community of Watts occurred, and culture was changing rapidly along with the politics. The Berkeley turmoil was filtering down southward. And with his outsider's perspective, I think Hamid saw these things more clearly than I did. But we were both shocked in the summer of 1966 when our common friend Tom Ashton was murdered in Austin, Texas, in a senseless mass shooting, the first of these random violent effects of the Texas Tower. Tommy was studying Farsi on his way to a Peace Corps assignment in Iran. I lost touch with Hamid for some 50 years there along the way. But happily, we got back in touch by email several years ago. And we finally met for lunch recently in Boston, now home to his daughter, Shada, and who joined us with Hamid's wife, Kelly, and my wife, Beth. Has Hamid changed during all these years? At some point, he stopped carrying a walking stick. And it's true that his once jet black hair and beard are now a distinguished gray with a benign resemblance to the late Karl Marx. This is in contrast to the earlier Che Guevara look that he had. But his wry sense of humor, quiet observation, and deep humanity are very much those of the young student I met 50 years ago. I've been delighted to learn about his very productive career and the happiness of his family life. Let me wish him and his family all the very best during the coming years after a very successful time at the campus. All the best to you, Hamid.
So my name is Shada Edwards Naficy, and I am Hamid Naficy's daughter. And what in the world can I say about my dear father in 4 minutes that will do justice to not only his professional contributions, but also how much he's meant to me in my life? This is a completely ludicrous, although laudable task. And so here goes. I thought I would share 10 points, 10 principles or values that my dad has inculcated in me over the years that I believe cross over his personal and professional lives. So here goes. Number 1, be an outsider. He has taught me that there is power in being on the margins, in being in betwixt and in between. You might say being in a liminal state, even though I didn't have that language as a child. Number 2, and this is related, think independently, even seek eccentricity. So he's always taught me to try and see things from a new angle, to experiment, as you can see from films like Salamander Syncope that use cutting edge technologies at that time to explore time-old primordial questions. And this independence of mind, I know, was very exhausting to inculcate in a small child who had lots and lots of questions, and a woman who now has even more questions. So I commend you for that, Dad, and I say that I can particularly appreciate that as I embark on the parenthood journey myself, as I've just given birth to a baby daughter who will hopefully be making a debut, temperament permitting, at the end of this video. Number 3, mixing is good, whether it's food, gene pools, cultures, or colorful socks. From the cross-cultural upbringing that I had to his interdisciplinary scholarship, which creates cross-pollinations across multiple fields, to his tendency to mix foods in ways that you might not expect, and my mom might not condone. My dad has never been afraid to take the best of multiple worlds and make a new whole from them, or to deconstruct that whole. Okay, this philosophy, I should also add, sometimes manifests itself in what we lovingly call his Dada tendencies, as in the art movement. Okay, number 4, convoluted is good. Here he has exemplified the belief that truth is never simple, that the answer is never certain and always conditional, and that there is nothing so entertaining as asking endless questions to try and get just a little bit closer to a truth, if not the truth. Now, this is a tendency that I am told by my friends and loved ones that has been passed on to me, so I can guarantee that it will continue to infuriate future generations. Number 5, be global and look at the bigger context. Zoom out. Number 6, get the job done. And I think this is well exemplified by two Persian sayings. The first is, Mojam agar miravam, gar naravam nistam. So if I am in motion, I am a wave. If I am not, I am nothing. Intense, I know, but very much him. Productive to a fault. The second one is, Kar ra ke kard, an ke tamam kard. Who did the work? He or she who finished it. Always finish what you start. Number 7, unlike so many men who are deeply committed to their work, he has always seemed to have time for us, to show that he loved us, and to teach us through his example to be kind, open-minded, compassionate, and devoted. And number 8, related to this, he's always believed in the value of our perspectives and vision. And I believe that this is one of the qualities that probably has made him such a good teacher. Lastly, document, document, document. My dad is a consummate archivist, and while this has led to a hell of a full house, as my mom can attest, it has also provided the foundation for those supremely well-researched books. And finally, on a more technical note, frame and never be backlit. Dada, I hope I've done you proud. And now, in the spirit of mixing, I want to show my family here, Ziana and my husband Shriram. We're sending
Congratulations.
Congratulations!
We're so proud of you.
Woo! You more than deserve this huge outpouring of love and gratitude for all that you've contributed, both personally and professionally. And we love you. And Baba Jan Zindabad.
Zindabad.
Congratulations, Grandpa, for your work. I like your silly drawings, like the ones you made of me and my sister, Baba.
Anything else?
And, well, I like when you let us go in Grandma and your car. It's really fun. And it's really cool.
Hello, my name is Vince Cerf. Hi, Hamid. It's great to see you. Well, at least virtually anyway. Congratulations, you figured out how to escape. I think I want to know what the secret is, and we'll talk about that offline. Meanwhile, just congratulations on an absolutely amazing career. Those of you who don't know, Hamid and I met in 1968. He wandered into the computer science department at UCLA before it was even the computer science department. And he found me and a Sigma 7 computer and a giant DEC 340 display. It was about 24 inches wide. And we found a 16 millimeter camera. We used the camera and the display to draw geometric images for his movie, which he then took all that film from and then did all kinds of other modifications to it to be creative. And went on, to his master's degree in fine arts, and then, of course, to an absolutely amazing career in Iranian film criticism and evaluation, among other things. So, Hamid, I wish that I could be there in person to raise a glass, to congratulate you, see Kelly again, and the rest of your family. I'm sorry that it's not in the cards right now, but I look forward to a chance to have a real reunion. I'll bring Sigrid along with me. But I really want to say congratulations on a long, very, very productive career, and one which I'm sure will continue, because you're not the sort of person to sit around drinking beer. I'm sure you'll find yourself all kinds of ways to be occupied and productive in this new chapter in life. So, happy sailing.
Great, and I would like to invite Jessica Vinegar to come over and give us a little bit of her memories of Hamid.
Wow, that was just so fantastic. You know so many great people. I don't know you as well as all of these lovely people who spoke about you, but I have some memories that I'd like to share, both personal in my relationship to Hamid and his work, as well as a colleague here at Northwestern. I'm in the Middle East and North African Studies program here. And if I had to think of two words that I would use to describe Hamid and his influence on me and on our program, and in general, his persona, it would be vision and warmth. So I'll start with the vision piece. As a graduate student in the 1990s, considering working on contemporary Egyptian art, Hamid's work was truly visionary for me, and thinking about how, first of all, legitimizing such a study of such a practice, but also thinking through post-colonial nationalism and its inherent international aspects. And so his work was one of the few that was available at the time. And so I think for my generation coming up in the 1990s, working on cultural production in, of, through the Middle East, his work was very, very important, as was Michael Fisher's. So just a little shout out to you as well. And then warmth. So then I got to finally meet Hamid at a conference when I was a newly minted PhD. And for the life of me, I can't remember where it was. It was somewhere very cold. I remember two things about this conference. I don't even remember the topic of it. It was in a cold location, and Hamid was so warm to me. And he never treated me like, you know, a newly minted PhD, recent graduate student, just always treated me like an equal at this conference. And I remember some lovely conversations over dinner. And then Hamid joined us here at Northwestern, and that visionary quality of his work, as well as his warmth as a person, came to sort of characterize all of our faculty meetings. Yes, I'm going to mention boring faculty meetings, but they were never boring with Hamid because he was always drawing and we could see his cool drawings. He would always have like the most pithy point to make about how we were building this program, because we were not a program a decade ago, and Hamid really played a strong role in helping us envision this program. And also just his warm personality at these meetings. Are you taking notes or drawing a picture of me? Okay, all right. And then just lastly, the most recent in-person memory I have of Hamid before seeing you today is when I ran into you in late March 2020, and he was so visionary. You remember what was happening in late March 2020. I ran into him, he lives in my neighborhood, and he was carrying 2 huge bags of alcohol because he knew we were in for the long run. And I took that lesson and I went myself straight to the liquor store. And thanks to you, you helped me get through the early part of the pandemic. But I doubt you're going to be sitting around drinking beers, as he said. But thank you so much for all you've given us here at Northwestern to this Middle East program. I really hope you don't go in complete exile from us. But thank you so much for all you've given us and me personally. Thank you.
There are other testimonials about Hamid, but I want to give you a little bit of my own impression of Hamid. Much has been said today about him as a scholar and a person who has had great impact on intellectually on the field that he basically created. But I want to also give you an impression of him, a personal and experiential impression of him that I had as a cultural activist. My introduction to Hamid Naficy was really more as an activist rather than as a scholar. And to really understand what I'm talking about, you have to have a little bit of a sympathy and empathy for the journey of an immigrant who comes to another country. And you are always in search of looking at your identity, where you come from, where you're going, how you're being presented in the new country of your adoption. And of course, the Iranian identity in the United States. When I came as an immigrant, young immigrant and teenager to the United States, was very stigmatized. We had the hostage crisis going on, the Iranian Revolution, and all of a sudden, everything Iranian became very, very negative. and impressions of, especially when you're going through your formation of identity as an Iranian American. My family sent me to the United States when I was about 14 years old to go to university, an American university, as an American student, not as an exchange student coming in. And then, of course, I chose to study chemistry and philosophy in college, and I still don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, and I'm still not sure what my identity is, whether I'm Iranian or American, or probably most importantly, a citizen of the world. But Hamid had an impact in that part of the identity formation for not just me, but a lot of other young Iranian Americans at that time. In the 80s, I had been in this country for about 10 years, and I was eager to get back in touch with my Iranian roots. But my parents would not allow me to go back to Iran because the Iran-Iraq war was going on. I would have been drafted, and I would be fighting Saddam Hussein. So that was out of the question. An opportunity for me in business came up to go and start a business in Los Angeles. In 1987, I moved to Los Angeles. And it took me just a few weeks to realize that I don't care the Iranian-American culture that's dominant in Los Angeles. And this is not really a healthy environment for getting back in touch with your roots. And who is offering anything positive about being Iranian in that context? I started to date a lovely young woman who happened to be in the dental school at UCLA. And one day I drove up to the UCLA campus to pick her up. We were going to go have dinner. And she walked in and she had a pamphlet in her hand. She said, there is a festival of films from Iran happening. This is around 1990. And so we got there, we got to the restaurant, we got to her place, and I started to look at the pamphlet. I fell in love with the writing of the descriptions of these films. And the dominant narrative at that time in Los Angeles was that Iran, something very bad happened about 10 years ago in Iran, and nothing good comes out of Iran. That's what the exile culture was all about. And you are basically, there was no vocabulary of being an Iranian American. You were either an Iranian, an immigrant, and you had to deal up with the stigmatization in the United States, or you just sold out the whole package of being Iranian and you just became fully American, almost forgetting about that context. Those were the choices available in identity formation for a young Iranian American, and it was particularly hard for Iranian Americans because these two countries are in conflict with each other. So you have to kind of pick. And this is, until Jesse Jackson started to come up with ideas like being an African American instead of a black, and then all of a sudden people started to call themselves, I'm Italian American, I'm Greek American. All of a sudden, new template was formed, and for us to be able to have a place. But anyhow, we decided to go to the film festival that night, one night, and I saw a film that just completely baffled me, was called Bashu Gharibe Kuchak, Bashu the Little Stranger, and walked out of the film mesmerized, ecstatic that there is actually really great creative individuals working in Iran and actually doing work. Not only is the work acceptable, it is globally, at the global level, it is fantastic. And all of a sudden, there was a way to have a healthier psychological relationship with your birthplace, despite the dominant narrative. But then once you walked out of that dark room where you saw the film, all of a sudden I saw Parviz Kardan, Parviz Sayyad, and all these other prominent Iranian artists with their placards basically saying that this whole affair is organized by the agents of the Islamic Republic, and you're all traitors for even paying to go see this stuff. And I started to argue with Parviz Sayyad. And he basically was making an argument to me that the real artists of Iran did not stay in Iran. They came outside. If you chose to stay in Iran, you had basically been co-opted by the Islamic Republic. And ironically, he was basically saying the real Iranian artist is an exiled Iranian artist. And my argument to him was that if you believe in democracy and freedom of expression, why are you protesting? Let the merits of their work speak for themselves. Why are you protesting me going to see this film? And as this was going on, all of a sudden I saw this gentleman whom I didn't know, but it was Hamid Naficy, walking in with Dariush Merjoui and Abbas Kiarostami. They were coming in, and then some of that got captured in the film. That what happened later on, a few minutes later, with that. But what happened to me personally is that perception of that bubble of perception of that Iran is something where something very nasty happened and nothing good comes out of it, and the dominant narrative of Iranian Angelenos got pierced. All of a sudden, this act of showing a positive component of Iranian culture, I think helped me and a lot of other young Iranian Americans at that time kind of have a little bit more of a positive relationship with our birthplace. And I'm indebted to Hamid and other people who basically pulled that off for us. And you have done enormous service to a lot of us. And thank you very much for having done that. I also want to invite Kyle Henry to come and make a few comments.
Hello, Hamid. I'm a film artist, not a film scholar. So in the spirit of art, I'm going to time myself as a performance art piece to try to spew out in 4 minutes everything that maybe has not been said since the moment I walked into this room, because I kept thinking, what could I possibly say about Hamid that has not already been said? So here we go. Hamid reanimates corpses. Hamid came to the Rice Media Center, a place that was pretty much dead in 1992 after Dominique de Menil and the Menil fortune kind of vacated the Rice University campus and went down to St. Thomas University. And Hamid saw real potential. He saw fertile ground. It wasn't a place that still did not have a lot of life left. And Hamid said something to me years later, which now I sort of understand where it comes from in his entire life work, which is, if you want something done, find a busy person. And Hamid was always busy. From the moment I met him 25 or 26 years ago. So I was an undergraduate at Rice University. I was one of those cinephile kids that haunts cinemas and just goes to every single film that's there. And I was a projectionist and a ticket taker. And Hamid was hired through the art and art history department. And I never used to see professors coming and seeing films that were shown at this repertory film program. And there wasn't a lot of programming input being given by the professors there. And immediately after Hamid coming to this department, there was a whole new series of programs and a whole new kind of cinema that was being brought to the campus and to Houston. And this is where I, as a gay kid from a small town in Texas, discovered a sense of cinema and a sense of strangers in a strange land, which you can be a stranger in your own land and not have moved anywhere. And I could see in the work of Adam Agoyan, or I could see in the work of Haile Garima, I could see in the work of the people that you brought in as scholars, as filmmakers, to speak a kind of way of seeing the world that was view askew. And represented a perspective that was necessary and difficult to wrestle with, but that sparked conversation, that shook people, that moved people to a new position. And this was something I didn't realize until I was asked to even give this talk. Where did partially this come from in my own work as an artist? And I think meeting Hamid and having Hamid come to the Rice Media Center was one of the reasons why a small kid from Texas could make films that would be able to go to Cannes and to the Sundance Film Festival and to sort of break my conception of the world that was formed in the very small Texas town that was very circumscribed in terms of the life and the thoughts and the ideas that were communicated. I will also mention in the 57 seconds that are left, that conference had an accompanying art show, the House Home Homeland show. Hamid saw this gallery space, this beautiful photography gallery space, and I came back 2 years after graduating, and let's be realistic, after having taught now at Northwestern for 12 years myself, undergraduates don't often come back 2 years after they graduate, but I wanted to come back and see that show. And that show was absolutely amazing. Photography, video installations, a whole accompaniment, to an academic conference that really expanded cinema beyond just the screen into a three-dimensional space. And I see now from the other testimonials, you've been doing this your whole life. So thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
We're going to end with two testimonials from family members. One of them I'm going to read for you from Hamid Naficy, also known as the poet of Los Angeles. I think I met him once, but I don't remember. But a lot of my friends in Los Angeles are big fans of Majid and the poetry gatherings. And it says, Hamid's impact by Hamid Naficy, Hamid's brother, 8 years younger than Hamid. That's the title. It says, since Hamid moved out of our parental house in the early 1960s, I have lived with him more than with any other siblings. When he returned to Iran from America in 1970s, we lived together in our house in Tehran for 3 years, and when I fled Iran and arrived in Los Angeles on May 17, 1984, I lived 6 years in the same building in which he had an apartment. But here, I don't want to write about these years because I think he had his most profound impact on me when I was becoming a teenage poet in Isfahan. Soon he went abroad for university education in Lancaster, England, and later to Los Angeles. During these years, most summers, he returned to Iran to visit his family. For me, Hamid was a window to the West and the Western free ideas. I still remember his letter from England in which he wrote about his visit to a mine in Lancaster. Also, when he came to Iran in the summer, he brought a gramophone record of the Beatles. When he left Isfahan, this time to go to US, he left his Beatles disc for us. I routinely took it to our patio and turned the volume up so high that the people could hear it from across the alley. It infuriated my younger brother, Saeed, who came home one time to ask me to turn it down. Hamid came back to from the US a summer later. He brought with him a collection of poems by Allen Ginsberg, the American beatnik poet, and he left his bookshelf in his room upstairs. He told me he can listen to music and write your poems as your thoughts flow freely. That's how I wrote my poems, Fifth Symphony, inspired by Beethoven's music, and it was published in Jozve Sher, which was ridiculed by Khosrow Shahani, the writer of the satire column Khargah Namadadi? Kargah Namadadi, I see, Namad Mali, okay. And Khandani Ha, my dad's favorite magazine. Hamid translated the Balt's Soprano and an anti-play by Romanian-French playwright Eugene Ionesco and sent it to me so I could publish it publish it for him in the avant-garde literary journal, Junge Esfahan. He also sent me a long essay about media theorist Marshall McLuhan, author of the phrase, "The medium is the message," with a provocative title of "How I Killed My Wife." These essays of Hamid had a profound influence on my poetry and literary thought. That's how I wrote my little poetry manifesto entitled Anti-Poetry Within Poetry, which was published by Ayandagan, a nationwide newspaper. Hamid and Kelly lived in a hippie commune in Los Angeles in the late 1960s. That's how Hamid brought the lifestyle of a hippie to me. One summer, he returned home from the US wearing long hair and bushy sideburns. I too began to wear long hair with bushy sideburns, sometimes something that was considered revolutionary in that era in our hometown Esfahan. Even my intellectual friends, especially my poet mentor, the late Mohammad Houghougi, were not able to accept this style. Hamid also gave me a man style leather tunic, which I wore with one of his jeans, and took a cane in my hand when went to Iran and Britain society with my sister Nasreen for the English classes. Hamid and I were very close. One time when I had fallen in love with a girl, and she had broken my heart, Hamid and I had a long walk along the beautiful Zayanda River, during which I wept profusely while he tried to console me. Hamid's free spirit had a profound impact on me, something that still inspires me today. Long live my brother Hamid. Long last his free spirit.
Hi, I am petrified, not so much by age, but more by terror. I'm not a good presenter, and I'm not comfortable in front of an audience, which is what drove me from singing in nightclubs when I was 18. I just couldn't do it, and I was out of the country then, and I took a shot of something strong before I went on stage and sang. And I'm wondering where that bag of alcohol is that, so famously, like, have you no mercy for a person with butterflies? Okay, I don't know how impatient you are, but I was unable to do just 4 minutes. If you will bear with me, at least I'll go as fast as I can. So this is a bit of personal history, his and her history. Since most of you know Hamid as an academic, you're not making it any easier, Since most of you know Hamid as an academic writer or professor, I thought to offer you instead this bit of personal history in which I played a part. People often ask how we ended up together, and it's not only one of, but the most important story of my life. So here goes. Hamid and I met at UCLA. I'd like to do. Help. Somebody help, I'm trying to get this to go. Sorry. It's like lucky I can still read, in my state, much less that one. Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a slideshow.
No, just one picture at a time, if you will. What? The first one, the girl, the goyle. Okay, here we go. Hamid and I met at UCLA. Hamid and I met at UCLA in 1968, thanks to a script writing class in which both of us happened to enroll. During a screening in the small theater room that we used, I happened, or I chose, or I was fated to sit next to him. In the darkened room, as we waited for the film to start, I began a conversation with him, mentioning how beautiful the gold bracelets were that he was wearing. And just then, the film began. But when the lights went up, he turned to me with, and that can be the second picture, he turned to me with intense dark eyes and a friendly smile on his beautiful mouth, which was framed by a dramatic full black pirate mustache and beard. He took off the bracelets and proffered them to me, at which point I was able to see that, yes, they were gold-colored, but made of plastic. This somewhat silly beginning did not, however, deter us. He invited me for coffee and after class, and I did not hesitate to accept. Our relationship evolved pretty quickly after that, and we set up a couple of casual dates in fairly close succession. These were followed by an invitation from him to come for an evening gathering around the celebratory bonfire at Ellis Island, the commune in which he lived. Those people there, I have the wrong copy of this, by the way, I can't believe it. So the people there were a set of counterculture people, all of whom were, as he has described them there, and as you may have seen them in the movie. But at any rate, we did have a great time that evening together, and I didn't go home for a week. I was pretty enamored. Viewed from a bigger or longer time frame, the truth is that I never really went back home. I thought about it once early on when, unaccustomed to his restraint and the expression of lavish affection, in a moment of insecurity, I threw myself down across a bed and volunteered to leave him. "I can't tell if you want me here or not," I wept, my own sense of pride being more or less at risk. But never effusive, but always kind and an understanding man, he was quick to reassure me. "Well, you're here, aren't you? You wouldn't be here if I didn't want you here." You can imagine how comforting that was to me at the moment, Anyway, truthfully, that exchange was seminal in defining the way in which our relationship worked. He didn't beg me to stay or make gooey, silly assurances. He asked me to assume responsibility for my own choices, as was he for his. And I stayed. About a year later, when I'd graduated from UCLA, I officially left the landing pad where I had maintained official residence with my mother, and we moved in together for the next 5 or 6 years. And then, for both of us, the more or less undefined and a bit rudderless life that we were living began to lose its charm. And at that time, neither he nor I was ready for marriage, much less a family. I'm a late bloomer and an adventurer, and I was no way eager to move from my parental home directly into a man's home as a wife or a mother, God forbid. The whole wide world lay before me still, and I was closing none of the doors. For Hamid, too, who was working as a director for the emerging cable TV industry, a similar sense of ennui and lack of inspiration with his job had taken over. His current lot was a far cry from what he and who he thought he wanted to be. Help for both of us arrived from Iran in the form of an unexpected visit from the chancellor of the newly formed, well-funded Free University of Iran, which was inspired by the English Open University system. This innovative new university was in the initial planning steps, and they were recruiting Iranian academics and professionals internationally to come home and bring the concept of long-distance college-level education into being as a reality in Iran, especially for the rural people who couldn't be in the cities. It was an offer he could not refuse, a door opening to create a meaningful future in his own native land for the good of the people there, and it called for some very quick decisions about our relationship. We discussed it for a few days and agreed to separate, with the amicable understanding that our relationship was on a kind of hiatus. Our decisions came from my own imperative need to live on my own and to know what it meant to be an independent, responsible, and a person living under her own agency with no help from a partner. And even more, of course, for him. He was very urgently needed to go back to his homeland to discover what the future held for him there as a fully mature professional that he had become. He left for Iran from LAX, and I returned to my newly rented 11th floor apartment on Venice Beach, where I consumed a bottle of champagne and listened to Cleo Lane's album and wept and then slept. Thereafter, we corresponded regularly in the fashion of dear friends, in a sort of a virtual bubble that existed apart from our real daily lives. And so, 2 years approximately passed that way. One day, at that time, while driving around on a late and lovely California summer afternoon with my best girlfriend, passing along the beaches along Pacific Coast Highway, we decided to pull over and watch the sunset. And we were sitting there for a quiet moment, sort of thoroughly enjoying ourselves, when the certainty that I wanted to be with Hamid descended over me like a revelation. It had taken all of this time of separation for me to realize that although I had moved in with Hamid on a lark, young as I was at the time, and I had no intention then of forming a permanent relationship, I was unable to create a relationship that could surpass the connection I had built with him. I was bonded to him in a way that simply left no genuine space for anyone else. I shared this enlightenment with my friend, and she quickly started up the car, and we drove straight back to my rented studio apartment on Sunset Boulevard. And I sent Hamid a very short telegram. You guys remember what those were, right? Just 2 words: marry me. Hamid, always wanting a bit of decide time, being a thoughtful type, responded 10 days later. And yes, it was a bit of a tense time for me. He apologized for the delay, indicating that a number of complex issues had to be resolved in the interim. Read current lady friend. And then graciously extended an invitation to come to Iran. A month later, I flew to Geneva. He met me there, and the rest is both his and her story. We've been adventuring now for 54 years, and our children and their children are waiting for us in Montana. So like any good film, we're going to ride off into the horizon, into the sunset. Bid you goodbye.
There's no way to follow that. That was so beautiful and so meaningful. Thank you. Can we just, one more time? Thank you. Thank you, Kelly, for that.